Hello, and welcome to the South Coast Artist Index, where artists, performers, and writers, as well as curators, directors, and supporters, anyone with ties to the creative community, drops by to introduce themselves to you. We'll talk about their beginnings, their vision, their passion, and so much more. The South Coast Artist Index podcast is brought to you in part by Heavenly Spirits, who invites you to celebrate the art of life and creative communities everywhere.
Hi, this is Ron Fortier with yet, thankfully and gratefully, another episode of the In Focus podcast brought to you by the South Coast Artists Index. We are approaching the 200 podcast mark, which is quite an achievement. And as per usual, my God, I feel like it's Groundhog Day because I say this at the beginning of every podcast. I'm going to have our guests introduce themselves and spell their names. Yes?
Okay, yeah, I'm Roger Kizik, Kizik, and I live here in South Dartmouth in a home studio I kind of built mostly myself. And although I was born in Boston and raised in Medford, Mass.
And so other than your connection of being, a resident of the South Coast now, did you have previous interactions with the South Coast?
No, none whatsoever. I did, like I say, I grew up around Boston all the time. We went to the Cape for, vacations at beaches. We went north. We went, Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, whatever. Never to the South Coast. Never to New Bedford. Never even to Little Compton, Rhode Island, or anything. So, but I was introduced to the area through an early teacher of mine at MassArt, John Thornton, who you probably know.
Yes.
And
he and his wife, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I'm the oldest people that they know here, And but he really pulled me down here. He helped me, set up a studio that I stumbled on at the Fairhaven shipyard initially, and he was, a fantastic friend, and his wife, Pat, of course. I was the only witness to their wedding, which took place at City Hall in Boston, decades and decades ago. But I also knew his first wife and their kids and everything else. But anyway, that's a whole different story. So yeah, and also through my ex-wife, an artist, Catherine Bertulli, who I met at MassArt, and we went through last half of MassArt together and, hung out and rebuilt a boat in Winthrop and married. And then it was a 10-year relationship. And she, again, a fantastic artist herself. And she went to UMass Dartmouth initially just to get out of her hometown of Melrose. And so we met down here, and she also simultaneously almost introduced me to the area. And it was just, I was smitten completely, because I love the Cape and all that stuff. But I like the fact that this, even the first introduction, anyone coming down here can see what a mix it is between pastoral and, idyllic coastline, a soft sort of water kind of thing. We do get brushed by the Gulf Stream a little bit. And so I liked ocean swimming and snorkeling and all that stuff. So the beach situation couldn't be better. And,
miles and miles of it. Yeah.
Yeah. But also I love the fact that there are still working farms here everywhere from New Bedford to Newport, basically. And I have biked every mile of every country road from here to Newport. And interestingly, the terrain, in my perception, it looked almost like dipping into the 50s or something, thinking of some fantasy of Long Island or the Springs, how it must have looked to Pollock back then or something. And that's how it looked to me. That's how I imagined it in my own reprocessing. And today, despite all the talk of how the South Coast, oh my God, people are going to discover it's going to be ruined in like 5 years or whatever. They've been saying that for 25 years now. And there are pockets of getting mucked up for one reason or another. But the pastoral experience for me, biking all these places, is almost better than it was 25 years ago, in that the landscape, it has been encroached upon here and there, but also it's been tweaked and improved. The way they divvy up land these days, you can build a house out someplace as long as it's on 3 or 4 acres, rather than a cluster. And and the landscape shows that, and you maybe have to be biking it or something to realize it. But so it hasn't been severely compromised, as people have warned. And unfortunately, even the development of New Bedford has been in fits and starts, 2 steps forward, 1 back. It's great that UMass Dartmouth was able to stay at Star Stores, because you probably remember they were threatened by about 15 years ago by a legislature that was about to close the door on the fine arts program here. And Lasse Antonsen and others, whoever was in administration at the school, and our state reps really stepped up, and they saved this whole program, I think.
I think it may have been Adrian Teo may have been dean at that time.
No, that was before him, actually.
That was before him.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Let's see. The only dean I remember was Dietmar Winkler, who probably was there forever. And
no, that was after him. Yeah.
That was after him. So
I met. He was sort of on board with Lasse, who was teaching, and also running the gallery.
Right.
But Lasse oversaw the transition of the Star Stores from a derelict sort of to the newly, how they reconfigured it for the school.
Right. I mean, one thing for sure, there's been a touch of visionary in the area, and sometimes it takes that almost generational thing to happen before it falls into place. The CVPA program didn't exist when our class graduated in 75, the BFA class of 75. It was just an art department.
Yeah.
And then when we left, I tell folks it was, CVPA as we know it today on the campus was a hole in the ground.
Yeah.
And so a lot has happened. And
well, of course, that the CVPA, the artistry program, all the craft things, that was evolved, a handoff from BU. Remember that? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Some of their instructors came down, actually relocated down here and discovered for themselves South Coast, and that was like a landmark moment, And
it's funny you say that, because a lot of Swanies, as I refer to them, Swain graduates, there's still a lot of bitterness about that entire transition, and yet, after what you just said, it's probably one of those moments that you really don't appreciate until somebody else picks up on it, like you just did.
Yeah.
And it caused more people to pay attention to what's going on here.
Yeah.
So it broke a little bit of our isolation.
Yeah. No, that's a great point. Yeah.
When I was in the BFA program between 71 and 75, I think it was our junior year, 74, we had a bunch of students, for some reason, it looks like they jumped the wall at MassArt.
Yeah.
And we were horrible to them. There was this provincial vibe. I don't know what the heck it was. It was like we were protecting our gold bullion or something. I don't know what it was.
Between MassArt.
It must have been 6 MassArt students. And they were more art students, quote unquote, than we were. The hair, the whole 9 yards, the vibe.
Yeah.
And, big city influence, obviously.
Yeah.
And one of them said, the best way to get to know each other is at the table. And to this day, every time I stir fry shredded cabbage, I don't remember any of their names for some reason, but every time I stir fry shredded cabbage, I remember them because that's what we had.
That's interesting.
And we were kind of isolated. And one of the projects for the Artist Index has been almost from day one the genealogy of art instruction in this area. Ed Tonieri, who was one of the major developers. I think he was like the leading developer of acrylic paint for of that day and age. He worked for DuPont, and also in collaboration with Boker, Lenny and
Boker.
Yeah, Boker.
Yeah. It's interesting you say that, because I'm a MassArt alum, painter, and at one of the teachers we had back, I was there was it 68 to 72,
right?
And Ron, another Ron, trying to remember his last name, he was a painting teacher, but he was on the ground floor of development with Liquitex.
Mm-hmm.
He introduced us to acrylic, and he was working with that corporation for really developing this stuff, even just chemically. And
right.
And another person I knew back then was also had some ties to Boker also.
Mm-hmm.
So
they may have all known each other.
Yeah, I'm sure they did. Yeah.
I mean, I met Robert Motherwell. I was introduced to him by Ed Tonieri. Ed Tonieri was like this incredible magnet.
Where was he based? Here or?
Yeah, he was actually he had a home in Dartmouth, I think, on Reed Road.
Wow.
And he was, as he told me, was a clarinet player. He was a musician. That's how he started off his professional career. And he was in the USO during World War II. And they were in some barroom and a fight broke out. And before you know it, he got roundhoused in the mouth. It broke his lip and destroyed his clarinet playing ability. And so he took advantage of the GI Bill and went to school. And his instructor was Hans Hofmann. So
in Provincetown or New York?
Pardon me?
In Provincetown or New York?
I don't know. I'm going to assume it was in New York, because he was well connected there as well. Because like I said, he knew Lenny, and I never remember, is it Ernie? The Boker, he always called it Boker brothers on Pearl Street. And he somehow was connected to the Swain. I've read something that I think he was an interim or temporary president of the Swain School of Design. And someone, to use that very old-fashioned term, wooed him away from Swain to start the art department at the then SMTI, which evolved to SMU, which eventually, at the time of the acquisition of the BU's Arts and Artisanry program, became was SMU, and then it evolved within about 5 years, I think, to UMass Dartmouth. So there was there's a lot going on there, and
I just want to break in to mention that when I first came down here, the Swain was still actually in existence, believe it or not, but they were in turmoil because the last president, who I forget his name,
Yenaway, I believe was his name.
What was it?
Yenaway.
Maybe, I remember. Very dynamic guy, actually. I met him a couple of times, but he had somehow created a somewhat toxic atmosphere, and then coming out of that, without condemning anyone, but emerging from all that storm and drang, that's when the BU thing. But it was somewhat. He was a kind of a player in that, and not in a positive way. I don't want to weigh in too much on that.
Right. Yeah. His name was Bruce Yenaway. I believe that was his name. Bruce Yenaway. Yeah. But there's this incredible thing, and because of Swain, I think the New Bedford, which is the epicenter of the South Coast creative community, although Fall River just in the last 24 months or so has made phenomenal strides. And they've tried
that.
They've tried before, but they and I think what it is they've used that term again. They've wooed away a couple of the players, and you might as well. From
UMass, or where?
From this area. From this area. Yeah, I mean, former personnel in the New Bedford art organizations, art industry professionals, as they call them. And, but there's a real dynamism here. It's like something that's been put on simmer on a stove for a long time, and it's really
That's true.
starting to come up now. I think I had asked you once before if you had ever ran across Jack Wolf. Yes, I think I did.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Because Rose Art Museum did a show of his. I think a retrospective. I was involved, because Carl Belts, one of my two directors I worked under, and the longest and a very great friend. We were like compatriots. He somehow he knew Wolf, from whatever, and we, he was gracious enough to do a show, and I went to Jack's studio at least once or twice with Carl.
Yeah.
And, I was quite amazed at that, eclectic body of work, but he also had trouble gaining traction. I mean, he was totally committed as an artist, but to have a wider audience is something, it was, and maybe still is, a struggle. Because I know he passed away, but I'm not sure where the status of his work is at this point, as far as his place.
I went for I was looking for work. I was looking for a part-time faculty position, and I went to somebody said, "Hey, go to Bridgewater. They're pretty inviting there." And I walked on campus. I hadn't been on that campus for like years, and I walked into the gallery, and there was a 12 by 20 something foot piece called something Roxbury. And I thought Jack Wolf was an African American. Because the characters, even though they were painted in a more of an expressionist form, it wasn't photorealism by any means. Each one of the characters had character.
I went to his website after we had a conversation recently, and I was surprised and quite amazed. Now he would be, front and center, although the fact that he's white could be some other complexity or something.
Oh, well, I've received that, because of the appropriation, because a lot of my subject matter, because half my family is African American. There's that appropriation thing, but it only really bothers white people. So far, I haven't had it from the African American community. But Laurie was a sweetheart. She was a former professional dancer. Anyway, the gallery director got me in touch with Laurie, with Jack's widow. I went to Stoughton to visit the studio, and it's probably exactly the exact same way as when you were there last.
He built a large building as a studio.
She hasn't touched a thing. And he had some cathartic moment in New York where he hit a tipping point with gallery directors or something. And you can imagine the scene from a movie where in the middle of Times Square, he just flips off with both hands the entire city and says, "Screw you, you blood-sucking leeches." And he leaves New York. Now he had a major exhibit at the Whitney and a bunch of other things going in. He was like really at that first peak, and he went back to Stoughton and stayed there for, he painted for the next 12 years of his life. But, I think he was also part of my changing over from abstract, not just my wife. I think that seed was already implanted in my head. And then when my wife and a friend of ours, a gallery, another artist and the gallery owner, started talking about something, and that's what moved me over. But if I had run into one of Jack's Indian paintings or Native American paintings, I would have sworn he was a Native American Indian. It was that kind of a thing where this guy was, the work was him and he was his work. And it was just absolutely phenomenal. So just through odd circumstance, I've met somebody on Instagram, and I told them she's a gallery owner out in California, and I told her about Jack's work. She contacted Laurie, and he had a massive retrоспective. It was like one of the biggest ones, out there. So it's just sort
LA
of cool.
or something, or
I believe it was LA. Yeah.
When was that?
It was before the pandemic. So I'm going to say 2018, maybe.
Very recent, quite recent.
Yeah, it was quite recent, quite recent.
And
But
how
that's
did it do? How did it play out there?
very well. I mean, people are like, where the hell's this guy been?
I'll definitely check that out online and stuff.
It's like a mutual passion of another mutual passion of ours is Frank Bowling. I mean, I went there to go see the Cy Twomleys because, you know, I've been in the shadow of Cy Twombly ever since I was in grad school. People kept saying, oh, it's just you work, you know, your work is just like Cy Twombly. And I never ever wanted him to enter my head because I was afraid of you know, I saw one or two pieces, I think, from the Chalk series, and that was it. It was like, crap, you know. And I got to be honest with you. I walked into the Frank Bowling gallery first, and I nearly wet myself because this man is a painter, and people don't quite understand. Painters, I think, were cut from a different cloth or a different canvas, as a friend of mine would say, because the surface it meant something. It's surface. It's not just throwing stuff on canvas.
No, of course. No.
You know,
and a narrative woven in there too.
Oh my God, yeah. I mean, this is a Black South American from Guyana, from British Guyana, who emigrated to New York City. He taught at was it Cooper Union and at Yale, I think, too. I'm
not sure about Yale, but
Columbia.
Yeah, I think yeah.
And then he emigrated to London, to England.
Well, actually, he was schooled in London initially. You know.
Okay.
Yeah,
and he's Order of the Realm. He's OEM.
Well, that's come very late. You know, he went, you know, to Royal College. He was in basically the same class as Hockney and Ron Kittai and others, and they all kind of mingled together and stuff with various degrees of affinity or not. And he was one of the players even coming out of it. But being Black was you know, that didn't go unnoticed, but he was very ambitious. As I did see the Tate retrospective in 2019, and you know, had pictures very influenced by Bacon and others, and but he was like a sponge himself. He absorbed, and as you saw in the Boston show, there were influence of you know, Larry Poons and Litsky and others, Rothko,
right.
And when
but never really. It was his work is like and depending on what phase the work, you know, represents, it's almost like a soup. And the kidney beans represent a little bit of Rothko, and the celery represents. It's never. He took the best of them all.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Yeah.
And then obviously the awakening of his, you know, of his Africanness, his Blackness, and then the juxtaposition of South America and Africa on some of those massive canvases, but still the surface is like this dull stained section, and then there's this highly, you know, varnished. It's just, oh my gosh.
And one shouldn't forget, nobody really mentions this, but as I think about it now, talking, because he also worked essentially on the floor more than anything else.
Yes.
I was I helped out in his studio occasionally, you know, in the early 70s, and I had the key to his studio on Broadway for many years, until there was a big lease, you know, someone screwed him on the lease. And he had to decamp eventually to Brooklyn, but he still was a dual, you know, continent person. I mean, he spent time in London and back in New York and back and forth. And but Frankenthaler, to me, you know, is probably a less spoken of influence. You know, with the stain situation, all the floor stuff and everything else, and they didn't, even in conversations with him back in the day, her name didn't come up that much, but I wouldn't be surprised if she was on his mind in some corner of his psyche there. And but yeah,
well, there was just, you know, in the 70s, if I remember correctly, there was just this general vibe about women, and her and Krasner To name the two top, the ones that come to mind the most, and because, oh gosh, because of their husbands. There's no getting away from that. But I remember Ed Tonieri saying to me, he says, "Don't ever repeat this to anyone." He said, "I hate teaching women painting." And I, he must have seen my face, and he went, no, nothing like that. The sadness of it is some of these women could wipe the floor with you guys. They have something I just can't wrap my head around to explain what it is, but it's wonderful. And the reason why I hate painting them is I know what's going to happen. They're going to get married, get pregnant, put down their brush, and never pick it up again. And it was sort of interesting. And then I started, looking at the women in my class, their abstract work, and I could see a little bit of what he was talking about. But there was also this other weird thing that it was just completely stupid. And it sort of goes back to my marketing days where there was this survey that they did and I still to this day can't remember which is which because I'm dyslexic, but they had said that Prego pasta sauce lovers are more than likely to be cat lovers, and ragu are more than likely to be dog lovers, or vice versa, because of my dyslexia, I can't remember. But I started noticing the women painters, the ones that were really, really outstanding, were the women who liked red wine and scotch. I don't know how that even came to my consciousness, but I'm sure, there could be a big, long, drawn out discussion on this, but anyway, the whole art scene here has exploded, but I don't think we've peaked out yet. I think there's way more to go. What do you think about that?
Absolutely. I mean, even the idea that people come to UMass, come and go. Sometimes they go elsewhere. Sometimes they hang around afterwards. There are others who have come from MassArt. They've come from, RISD and very serious programs in the Midwest. They've heard about, the seriousness of the program here, both in painting, sculpture, jewelry, all sorts of things. The furniture making, all that, and it's it's definitely competes on I think a pretty serious level with the top programs elsewhere. I mean, you just have to look at the where these last 10 years, where the people who have done the shows at Star Stores, their graduate shows, whatever, where they have come from. They're not necessarily local.
It's true, because I think I may have told you the story by some surreptitious chain of events. I was told to apply for grad school at the University of Miami. I did, and I got the call, to set up an interview. I had to fly down there, and I was, kind of dumb. I just floated along like a feather. I had no idea what was going on.
You got your graduate thing? Or
my MFA, yeah. I had no expectations, whatever, and I didn't even know how to dress. How do you dress for an MFA interview? And that kind of thing. And I walked. I was brought into the office of the dean, the department chair, by the secretary, and I was told, "Oh, he's on his way. He's just wrapping up his class." And the first words out of his mouth wasn't, "Hi, my name is," or "I'm so glad to see you." It was, "Where the fuck did you go to school?"
Oh yeah.
And I'm like, oh my God, I just blew whatever the heck it was in, airfare, and I'm staying at a hotel, and this guy's already like on a shred. What the hell is this all about? And I went, "Pardon me?" He said, "Where the fuck did you go to school? Because I want more of you to come down here."
Oh, really?
And it's like, what? He says, "I have never seen anything like it in my life." And what got me there was a painter who was a year ahead of me, and he had been accepted. So that was the first notch, so to speak, in this awareness. And it was like, wow, that's quite unbelievable. one of the instructors that reviewed my work was Gene Masson, who was the first assistant to Siqueiros, the muralist, the number 2 Mexican muralist. Everybody remembers Rivera, but Siqueiros is. It's like, what's that other guy's name?
Yeah, no, although they're kind of getting it, so equality almost.
Yeah, and I couldn't figure out, like, what's the big deal? What's the big deal? I have no idea what the big deal was until I was leaving one of my drawing classes. I was instructor of record, that first year, and I'm coming back out of my class, and I see this young woman. She's a senior, and she's out painting. She's plein air, and I look at the work, and I said, "What are you using for a medium?" And she looks at me and goes, "What's medium?" And I was trying to not make the stupid looking face. I didn't want to insult her. It's like, but the brain is screaming, "What the hell are you talking about? What's medium? You're a senior, for God's sakes. How the hell can you be getting out of here without knowing what medium is?" Especially with Tonieri, who used to hand out, marinara recipes and medium recipes. We were doing black oil. We still wonder how much lead poisoning we may have been exposed to. But it was just absolutely amazing.
This was at Swain. That's where you did your.
No, at SMU. At SMU, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So it was just weird. What do you see as a well-established painter? I mean, you have an incredible career and background, and the people that you've bumped into. What do you see in the art community? Who do you you have a right to your opinion. Who do you see as rising stars?
Well, in the area?
In the area, yeah.
I have to confess, I'm, somewhat, bordering on oblivious. Before he left, I mean, actually, Lasse Anderson. Yeah. He hooked up with Ellen Noble, and she actually influenced him a lot on his own work.
Oh, I can see the cross-pollination between those two, yeah.
And now they're really like a very dynamic duo, and I followed that development just in the last couple of years. Mm-hmm. And he was always, he was an artist before he became an academic or a teacher,
right,
back in Europe and stuff. But his work kind of, centered around assembling things, finding, animal, taxidermy things,
right. Curiosity.
Exactly.
Cabinets, curiosity cabinets. Yeah.
And anyway, they were interesting for sure, but only in the last 5 years has he really evolved as a, hands-on, making sort of every element, and also I think with him, both of them, they apparently are very deeply into Korean art. They go to Korea. All of this.
In fact, I think they're there now. Still.
Yeah. So he's the person I do keep my eye on. And I'm trying to think now of
there's Mark Dion from Fairhaven that's gone international. I have not yet been able to get a hold of him.
He's done that whole. He's a master of that. Cabinet of curiosities, but he hasn't forgotten his roots in New Bedford. Many projects he's done, elsewhere are rooted here in a sense. So give him credit for that. And I'm trying to remember. Also, of course, right now Troy Hendrickson, who is a local guy, and who's found a place for himself in Paris and France and a bit more around Europe. And he's right. His show, I think, is playing out right now at the if it hasn't ended, it's soon to be. It's right.
I think he has another show that just popped up somewhere up the Cape, I think, right?
Oh yeah, okay.
Yeah. Oh, and then there's Richard Neal.
Yeah. I saw that show. I wasn't aware of his work. That was fantastically good.
Yeah.
At the New Bedford Art Museum.
So just picking your brain and to spin this completely in another direction. It's like one of those car chasing scenes where they go around the corner and then you see the fishtail thing. How do we as a community of creatives attract buyers and collectors from elsewhere? Or do you think that don't sweat it. They're just going to end up coming on the train anyway, when the train
Well,
arrives next year.
That's a very layered and vexing question, I would say.
Yeah.
The interesting, as again, you probably know, there's a kind of a core families here who go back generations that had ties to Boston, Cambridge, New York, elsewhere, but always had summer homes here. But as some have, matured a little bit, those summer homes have become permanent homes, and they have kids and grandchildren. And I've touched upon a few myself. There have been some local folks who have been incredibly, supportive. Fran Levin,
Yep.
Fran and Clint Levin, and Audrey, and Williams, and her husband, Michael Tushman, and others.
Right.
But as far as that is, there is money here for sure.
Yes.
And sometimes I think the taste still is a little conservative, although I think Dee Dee Shattuck did a fantastic job of, starting up that gallery of hers, which
and
was
not exactly in a well-traveled area either. I mean, that was a destination gallery.
She built it into it, because that was her fantasy. She had, again, ties to New York and elsewhere, and had some means and some degree, and her husband, Bill, of course, was linked to UMass, a very, beloved teacher there for decades, besides an artist himself, and his son.
And his son also, yeah,
who has so much talent. He doesn't know what to do with it. He's amazing. And but because they came to me a little bit for some input when she was, I want to do this gallery. I've always thought of it for years, and I'm going to take the step and make that change, and she did, many of the right things. She didn't skimp on a space. That's, just a fantastic vehicle to present art, and she, drew in her friends, and it had a great run, and now she's backing off from that, although the building is still there, and it has some community functions as an art and cultural locus, but she was, but also, as you remember, over the 10 years, she brought in, she and Ben, and the couple of curators brought in some very good people. The archive of shows there, and there's some terrific things, it's just a tragedy that it hasn't been able to keep going, sustain itself in the way that she envisioned, in a way.
Yeah, I mean, even with the Van Viesen Gallery in Tiverton, Little Compton area, Marika Van Viesen, and unfortunately, she just it just played out. It just got to be too much for her.
Is that closed already? No.
Yeah, she closed it now, and I was supposed to. And she warned me. I was supposed to have exhibited there, and had I done so, I would have been the last show in the building.
People were talking about, which this just happened recently in the spring.
Oh, let's see. I came back from Portugal in 2017, so it must have been 2017, 2018. Yeah.
There's somebody else doing art there, though, exhibiting. I forget.
Is there?
Yeah,
it's possible. I mean, it was a nice space. That was a very nice space. But let's see. Let's try to wind us down now. Looking, over your entire, the arc of your life, so to speak, as a professional painter. We've discussed how things were back then, and involved. Where do you think things are going? Because don't forget, we're still like cavemen. We are applying pigment with a medium to a stretched piece of fabric on sticks.
Are you talking about painting, like in general, or here?
Yeah, painting is in general. Yeah.
Oh no, yeah. Well, I think in fact, painting in general, in the world sense, is couldn't be healthier in some ways. I think someone like Frank Bowling or others, who have been laboring for decades, but and making their way, but are now evolving, are emerging as, these, senior people, but across the spectrum of anywhere you go, to China or, New York, London, everywhere. I think painting that's cross-linked sometimes with other creative endeavors, sometimes by the people themselves, but others, even like Richter, is he goes both ways between loaded political narratives of a sort of very highly crafted realist sort of things, and these incredible abstract side, and I mean, I go a bit of that myself with the cutout things. I'm too diverse for my own good, for sure. And
let's in fact, I'm glad you mentioned that, because let's talk about your diversity. Why are you so multi-focus sounds like an oxymoron, but why are you so multi-focused? I mean, Jack Wolf was the same way. I mean, he had like 5 different styles. He had a polymath style. I mean, the Fabrionici and all these other theorems and such from mathematics, where the average person is looking at it is like, oh, I didn't know that's what it was supposed to be like. I just like it.
Well, I think maybe it's my sort of immediate restlessness in some ways. I see something on the corner of my eye, whether it's an art object in a book or something, or something I've seen, whatever, in a museum. And I said, geez, I could do an interesting version of that, and sort of claim it, not as my own, but inspired by whatever. And, but on the other hand, the abstract side says, oh my God, I could see, playing around with this paint, in a very liquid way and see what happens, but I mean, for me, sometimes I'm kind of maybe imprisoned by that diversity, because while I'm in it, almost like an actor or something, I'm like a character actor who can't decide on, what his, most iconic role will be. He doesn't have someone. You think of someone like Daniel Day-Lewis or who other, many other people who they have incredible roles, but you can't remember who played that guy or that woman, whatever, and yet they were so convincing in the moment, And
that's so comedian-like.
But as I said before, when I've had institutional shows, whether it's New Bedford here or at Phillips, Ando or Exeter,
right,
and New York, or in Boston or whatever, when there's a mix with enough space to put an abstraction next to a book or cutout or something, people see, oh, I can see maybe there's a hand that it connects the two in some way, or
right,
or a creative little restlessness that affirms itself in both media, both sides, and which I don't think is that remarkable, to be honest. I mean, we are multi-talented people as a species. We can walk and chew gum, obviously.
Now, are you working, or have you ever worked under the auspices of a gallery director, a gallery manager, art manager, whatever the heck they call them now, because that's changed as well. In other words, I remember I was picked up by the Medici Berenson Gallery in Miami, Bal Harbor, and I did these little constructions. They were like 6 by 6 inches, and they were raving about them and so on and so forth. And no sooner did I deliver the work to the gallery, and the woman spoke with me, with a little bit of that accent. She says, "Oh, these are just marvelous, Ron. They're just but darling, people want big things now. Big. Can you make these big?" I'm like, what?
No.
But we laugh at that, but they're the conduit to sales. They're the ones that know the market and what people want. So, do you go along to get along?
Well, I think in some outings with other galleries, like in Boston or something,
right.
There were moments when said, "Oh, these with these large works on paper with collage, they did well." So, oh, maybe it's more of that, and I might try that, but again, I don't really trust that that those kind of what's the word, topical assessments or something, of the time of that moment. And because if they say, oh, well, these will do well, but by the time you do a body of such and such, then some of them moved on or something like that. You
That's-
can't second guess. That
Yeah.
that's to me a dangerous thing.
Yeah.
But I do wonder what will, but I have a reasonable sort of online presence if you Google my name.
Right.
Like that. And but the phone hardly ever rings from outside people. My friends call, stuff like that.
Yeah.
But and I really don't know what my own answer is, or what's the ticket for me. All I can say is, despite the resume, it's been a series of like tantalizing dead ends. Really, I mean that.
That's a great title for an autobiography.
That would be, if I had a tombstone, that would be it.
Yeah.
And, although my ashes will probably go in the outgoing tide off of Little River Bridge or something like that.
Oh yeah, one of my favorite places over there. Yeah. Are the crabs back, by the way? Just to be totally off topic, are the crabs back at Little River Bridge? They used to be a great crab hole.
Really?
Yeah. You would just have to get a piece of fish and tie it on a line and just drop it over and wait, and the crab would grab a hold of it. And you just like gingerly pull it up, and then you had crab.
Well, there is a big hole right at the lip. They had to go. That's why kids jump off it. You're probably one of those kids who are jumping off the bridge, right?
Yeah.
And there is a deep hole right at that point. It gets shallow very quickly as you. But it is relatively safe to jump there. But there is a hole right there, and
there was a ferry there way back when, because the house to the upper left as you're coming over that bridge, that's the ferry house. So I assume there was, either it was the last name of the family, or there was actually a ferry that went there. Hey, we got to wrap this up. This has been fantastic, but I do want to continue this. We have to go out for coffee or a couple of beers or something like that, and continue on. If I'm going to ask you one of those Barbara Walter things, if there's one thing that you could do over in your life, what would that one thing be?
Oh, good God. Jesus.
I wouldn't even know how to answer that, but anyway. I'm not you.
Yeah. Well, maybe I'll turn it on its head. And I will say, I never considered myself college material, because I nearly failed Latin in the 7th grade. And in that time, you had to have a foreign language under your belt.
Right.
And so I turned to shop and art and stuff, even in junior high and through high school. But I would have to say that, the choice I made of art is the best thing, and I could have done other things. I could have been a, yacht design or working a boatyard. I love the whole, I've rebuilt a couple of boats and all that. I'm fairly skilled in some things, but the thing I do best is make art. Take a brush or a utensil or something and make marks or whatever, something that is the thing I do best, and a lot of people don't realize who they are, and I did realize that, and for better or worse. I mean, I've had some great affirmative moments and timely sales and write-ups and all that stuff, and so that the crooked path has not discouraged me from continuing on, even though it's a very crooked path. But also, but my health, I've been incredibly lucky, health-wise and everything else. So, and the friends and so maybe I don't have any regrets about, the path, and I look out today where I am, and it was actually due to my father's, that's a whole other story, but I couldn't have built the place I have without his kind of prudent management of his own fairly lean, finances or whatever,
Right.
And he was a blue collar working guy.
Yeah.
But he was also a musician. He was a sax and clarinet guy, and who had fantastic, career on his own, but had to make a choice between factory work, running a factory.
Oh yeah.
Not just laboring away, but running the thing, but also doing the labor and the music. So
yeah.
So no, I have no regrets as far as my overall choice. That's
great. That's great. Roger Kizik, thank you so much. for being with us today. This wraps up another episode of the Artist Index In Focus podcast. And we'll see you next time on the other side, folks. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
We'll see you next week for another episode of the South Coast Artist Index podcast. To learn more about the South Coast Artist Index, visit theartistindex.com. Find us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube.